When it comes to trailers, probably the most aggravating thing is lights and wiring. Today, let's take a look at the top 5 things that I see on a regular basis when it comes to issues with trailer lights and wiring. When it comes to 12-volt trailer wiring, whether that be incandescent or whether that be LED, coming in at number 5 is cheap or undersized wiring. If you're going to rewire your trailer, if your budget allows, try to put quality wiring. Make sure it's the correct wiring. What I mean by that is if you have a trailer that has a lot of lights, especially incandescent, you're going to have to figure the load. You're going to have to figure the amp draw on that to make sure you have the properly gauged wire. This wire here is not a cheap wire, but this is an 18 gauge wire. 18 gauge is going to run some LED because LED have low draw, but if you're running incandescent on this, you're going to have a lot of voltage drop. And we'll talk about voltage drop towards the end of the video. And when it comes to buying a quality wiring, especially on the front end of the trailer where your connection is going to be, whether that be your 4-way, 5-way, 6 and or 7-way, use a good wire. When it comes to 6 and 7-way, I like to use a deep freeze wire. And what that means, this here is good down to negative 85 Fahrenheit or negative 65 Celsius. It's good to 80 degrees Celsius or 176 Fahrenheit. And what that means is it's not going to melt or freeze and rupture. When it gets super cold, like if you live up north where it's cold, where it's maybe so cold that the loggers keep their hands in their own pockets, it will become stiff and it will cause it to come out of the plug on your tow vehicle because it becomes so rigid. So it's not going to be this pliable when it's below 0, but it will be pliable and it will last longer. The outer coating by a good quality 7 or 6-way wiring. I don't know that I'm going to be able to find a link to this. If I can, I'll leave that in the description below. Be sure to put that, because this is going to be exposed to elements. It's going to be exposed to all your UV on the front of the trailer. A lot of the other times your wiring is hidden, whether that be in conduit or up underneath the trailer, but just use a good quality wiring on the front and use a good quality plug when you plug that into your tow vehicle. So number 5, cheap wiring and or undersized wiring. It's a killer. The next issue coming in at number 4 is cheap lights. Whether you get those in the US or in China, doesn't matter. Both those places make cheap lights. So if you're gonna go with the LED or an incandescent, make sure you buy a quality light from a reputable brand. Here we have a cheaper light. This is incandescent, but this is not the lowest end. This is an Optronics. Even though it's incandescent, still a good light. This is the version in LED. Between these two lights, you're going to get longer service out of this unless you back into something and knock one of them off. They're built about the same when it comes to the structure, just the LED is going to hold up better than the incandescent bulb in here. I really like LED, but if your budget doesn't allow for LED, then go with incandescent, just buy a good one. But there is a big price difference. You can find these lights anywhere from $3 to $6. These lights anywhere from $18 to $25 depending on where you're buying them. So steer clear of cheap lights if you can afford it. It's just going to save you some time and trouble down the road. The number 3 issue is cheap connectors. These are commonly known as a Scotch lock style connectors. Say no to Scotch locks unless you're using it for a temporary application. Be sure to check out the description below. We'll leave a link to a video that's going to cover rewiring more in depth on this, but don't use these if you can keep from it. They are cheap, so use something that's good. A good vinyl coated connector at the very minimum. I'm going to suggest a heat shrink style butt connector when you can use that. You can use a little mini torch to heat that up to give you a good weatherproof seal. Kind of helps hold that connection together. If you want the absolute best wiring that you can provide for yourself, or if you want to go to pay to have it done, solder all your connections, then you'll have to cover it with some type of heat shrink to make it weatherproof. This is the absolute best way, and I will tell you 9 out of 10 people are not going to do this because of the time and the cost. If you have to pay to have this done, it's going to be super expensive. If you have the knowledge and the skill set to solder and the patience to do it, then do it. It is very good. It will last for a long time. You'll have less issue, but if not, at least use a heat shrink style connector. You can find these about anywhere. We'll leave a link in the description for every part that we're using today. We're going to cover some tools here in a little bit, but just steer clear of the cheap connector. Don't buy into that. Don't waste your time. Also, electrical tape. Buy good quality electrical tape. we don't use a ton of electrical tape. We use electrical tape more for bonding stuff together than we do actually covering a connection. We try to do those with heat shrink, but if you are going to use electrical tape, use something, you know, from 3M, something that's going to be decent, that's just going to last. Coming in at number 2, very common issue is incorrect wiring, or the trailer has been wired incorrectly. Just remember, yellow and brown make khaki. They don't make left turn, they don't make tail marker. Usually we see the wiring issue at the trailer plug connection, whether that be 7-way, 6-way, 4-way, or 5-way flat. Many times it is confusing if the trailer has a 7-way blade style connector and it's been wired utility style wiring, or it's been wired RV. We will leave a link in the description below that covers both of those wiring schematics, because the color code is different on both of those if you're wiring it utility or if you're wiring it RV. So many times you just can't pop the plug open and go by the colors. If you don't know how the trailer has been pre-wired, you're gonna have to look at that. You're gonna have to diagnose the trailer to see what color goes to what, whether it be left turn, right turn, tail marker, so forth and so on. So that is a very common issue. We'll see it at the actual light connection. Many of your incandescents, it doesn't matter. They're not polarity sensitive at the light connection, but LEDs are. So if you hook your wires up backwards, or if you get your ground backwards on an LED, they are not going to work. So it's a very common issue, very simple mistake to make. It's just a lack of knowledge on the front end. Sometimes even when I'm wiring a 7-way plug, if I've been wiring a lot of utility style for a few days, and if I have an RV, I got to think about it for a minute, because I will get my wires crossed. It happens to the best of us. So just be sure you check that out, just to save you some time and some trouble. And coming in at number 1, the biggest issue I see is the lack of a ground, or a bad ground. I can assure you, if you have 12-volt lighting, incandescent, LED, if it doesn't have a ground, it doesn't have a light. You have to have a ground. You cannot have too many grounds. Don't count on it grounding through the ball of your truck. That worked back in the 80s when our ball was attached to the bumper, and that bumper was made out of steel, and that steel bumper was fastened to the steel chassis, had a good chassis ground connection on there. Now you have receiver hitches with inserts and adjustable balls and all different kinds of stuff. Grounds aren't coming through there. It has to have a chassis ground through the plug. Put you a ground at the front of the trailer. Put you a ground at the back of the trailer. That way if one of them fails, you have a secondary. We always ground in 2 locations. Depending on length of the trailer, we may ground in 3 locations. That way if a mouse gets in there and decides he needs the ground, I've got 2 more to back it up. Or for whatever reason that connection comes loose, if you're using a machine screw, self-tap, or whatever it may be, make sure you have a ground. You're gonna get light flicker with no ground, you're gonna get no lighting with no ground, and that is the biggest issue, is no ground. We're gonna move to the back of the trailer. We're gonna show you a scenario, and we're gonna show you kind of how to diagnose maybe some of your problems, how to look for them, to do some maintenance. We'll cover some of the tools that I would recommend. Again, you can find those tools in the description below. These are tools that we use in the shop. They may not be the most expensive ones out there, but we use them. They do us a good job. Hopefully they do you a good job. So let's move to the back of the trailer. So let's just talk about a few tools that'd be good to have around if you're doing your own maintenance, if you're doing your own diagnostics on your wiring. Need a good pair of crimpers. These are gonna be good for your non-insulated connectors. If you're using heat shrink, they'll also be good for your vinyl coated. Also has a pair of cutters. Many people use these as strippers as well. If you have used these, you can use it for all those. If you want something a little better for stripping, you can use this, or just a standard pair of strippers. These do a really good job. We use them every day and they hold up. If you're gonna use heat shrink connectors, I recommend getting a pair of crimpers specifically for the heat shrink. Yes, you can crimp heat shrink connectors with a pair of regular crimpers like this, but especially on your yellow, larger butt connectors, many times it will cause the insulation, the heat shrink on there, to split. So these crimpers here are specifically designed just for heat shrink style butt connectors. They're not expensive. They're good to use. Mini torch, you can use that, or a heat gun, or a Bic lighter, just something to melt that heat shrink down, whether that be in the butt connector form or whether that be in the tubing form. And if you're using this, you're likely using this. So if you have the capability to solder, buy you a quality soldering gun, some quality solder, and make all your connections last for a long time. The only way this won't last is the wire chews around the solder, and then you're going to be back to point A and you're going to do some more soldering, so you'll be well practiced in that. So let's move on to show you how to diagnose the ground issue that we talked about, which is the number 1 issue, how to quickly find that and correct it, just kind of what to look for. One of the most important and handy tools you're going to need is a test light. This is rated for 48 volt and down. They also make them that are gonna have a digital display. This is rated for 48 volts and down. This is good if you think your wiring's undersized. So if you have 12 volt at the front, you can test the back of the trailer, especially if you have, say, like a long hot shot trailer, horse trailer to LQ, or travel trailer, to see how much voltage. If you have 12 volts up there and you're only getting 5 or 6 volts back here, your wiring is either damaged or it's undersized. You're going to need to upgrade that. You can have a little voltage drop, but you don't want a bunch of voltage drop. It's going to, especially on the LEDs, is going to cause them maybe to act a little funny. Incandescents, you're going to get some flicker and stuff like that. So here we have a left turn tail light combo. This is an inexpensive incandescent light. This one, if we look here, let's look here at the back. I'm gonna see if we can swing the camera around. So you have a stud mount. Many times the lights are grounded to the stud mount, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just has to be clean. However, this one has a ground wire. So we're gonna look at this ground wire. Usually if it has a ground wire, it is not grounded through the studs. It can be, but not all the time. You need to check both. So we know that we have power coming to the light. We've looked at the plug on the front. The fuses on the truck are good. So I'm going to easily test the ground. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ground the test light. So the other side, I have it grounded up underneath to a floor screw. That was the cleanest thing I could find on here without grinding a spot. So once we have that grounded, we're going to take our test light and pierce the ground. So I'm going to show you on the back side piercing the ground, and I'll show you what we're going to hope to find. So I have the ground pierced. The light is still not lit, but if you notice what it did to the tail light on the trailer, my test light is dead. But if I remove the test light, light goes out, pierce it again with the test light, light comes on. That immediately tells me that this ground has failed because it is now grounding through the test light itself. That is a very quick way to find it. If it were the stud on the trailer, you could just simply touch the stud. If either your light lights up on the stud or the light lights up here, it's got a bad ground on the stud, which usually just means taking the nut off, cleaning any rust, corrosion, or paint from underneath that nut, retightening it, and you're usually good to go. So on this light, if we pierce the ground and the light does not come on or our test light light up, and we move to the supply wire and it comes on and lights up, then the issue is likely in our light. It's incandescent, could just be the bulb. If you have this style light that has a twist in bulb, many times you'll on a rough road, the vibration will cause that bulb to twist loose. We do say bulb sometimes here in Texas. Because it twists loose, many times you just take the cover off, spin it back in, and you'll be fine. I'm not a big fan of this style light unless you're on the highway, just due to vibration. Depending on what highway you're on, it will shake the bulbs loose. They're not as good as they used to be back in the old days. Do I still sell this light? Absolutely, because some people's budget, that's what they need, so we do sell it. But I am up front with them and say, you know, this is not a quality light. That's why there's a big price difference in that. It's the best light that we can find with this style bulb setup. But bulbs are cheap, and many times, like I said, it's just vibrate out, pull the cover off, twist that bulb in, and that will be it. So if you have power coming back, just start with your grounds on any of your lights. You know, sometimes that ground, if you pull the cap off and it's an old like 194 bulb, it may not have a wire. It may be grounding through whatever style fastener that attaches to the trailer, maybe a rivet. If your lights are riveted on with aluminum rivets, I promise you're gonna have trouble at some point. If you tap that rivet with a test light, many times the light will come on, this will light up, wiggle it around, and come on. At that point, take that rivet out of the trailer and put you a new rivet in, or put a self-tapper that's going to grab a little bit better. So just remember, if you're having lighting and wiring issues, a lot of the times it's a ground or a bad connection. Can be a direct short as well, but with a little knowledge, a little know-how, and just a few tools, most of these problems you can correct yourself. At least get it good enough to safely get you down the road to a repair facility. You may need a full rewire, or if you're traveling cross country, I would recommend keeping a small bag of these tools, maybe a spare light, some extra wiring, and some fuses in that go bag. Because if you're like me, when you break down or have an issue, it's going to be away from everything that's going to be able to help you. So hopefully this helps. Hopefully this will help you take a look at your trailer and give you some confidence in getting your lights working. Because if you're driving at night, if you're driving in areas that have low visibility, you need to have lights, you need to have reflectors, you need to be able to see that trailer. It's aggravating when you're going on the road and somebody's pulling a big trailer and you roll up on it. They don't have any DOT tape, nothing, and it's completely dark at night. And it's very dangerous and cause an accident. So don't get caught with no lights. Get the lights working, whether you do it or you take it to a qualified professional to get that done for you. And we will see you on the next one.